Hello. I guess I should start out this video by saying that sometimes it is necessary to see a therapist if you need to. And I'm not going to say that art always involves isolation, but to a large extent, many art requires you to be with it and to be away from everything else so that you can truly focus on it. And that's something that can be a bit nerve rattling to people who are used to, I don't know, constant stimulus from their environment, or people who are not used to working in isolation and solitude. I think to an extent it can be a healthy thing. I'm not saying you should be doing nothing but it, because it can probably drive one to, you know, mental unhealthiness. Maybe that's the best way to say it. So, when it comes to having your own art area, I always recommend that it's distraction free, or turn off distractions. Personally, on my phone, sometimes I'll just be getting so many messages that it's like I can't draw because I keep getting pulled out of my drawing flow every 2 minutes. And it's things like that that are incredibly, I think it can be a bit damaging. I think you could always recover from it, but it does take some time. Like, people need long periods of uninter people need long periods of uninterrupted drawing time, and that's a very hard thing to get sometimes. Sometimes it's not possible. I mean, if you have kids, if you have a noisy roommate, if you live in an area that's not quiet. I was actually talking to a friend a little while ago, and he lived in an apartment, in a basement apartment, that he said the walls were thin, so he was always getting street noise. So it was awful for him, and he hated it. So it's like, how could you focus on anything if you're constantly getting noise? In some of my videos, I even struggled with making videos because there used to be a guy on his motorcycle going up and down the street, and it was just like, up, there he is again. This is what I have to work with, and it's like, it was bad when I was making videos, but then I go and try to draw, and it's so incredibly distracting. There are other times when I want to say I read an article from NPR, and basically they were talking about how people who live close to highways, it's apparently really bad for your health. Apparently, even though you may tune it out, uh, you don't tune it out subconsciously. So it's apparently very stressful. And I think that makes total sense because we're living with my parents right now. Down the street, we have a friend who has beehives, and apparently, when he's been attacked by the bees a couple times when he was mowing the lawn close to them. And I find it interesting that, I mean, you know, me and you know that a lawnmower won't isn't a threat to us. I mean, as long, you know what I mean, as long as someone's not trying to attack you with a lawnmower. But to bees, they live in the moment, always in the moment. So it's like they hear something and they're like, "That's a threat. We have to attack." So they do. And if if we as humans say we could tune it out, but bees can't tune it out, I highly doubt that we could truly tune it out. I highly believe that it's there, and you just have to. There's no way around it. You're stuck with it. Like, it's gonna be there, and it's definitely going to be pulling you out. So I guess you could say isolation can sometimes be really difficult to get based on the situation, but there were other times that I had long periods of uninterrupted time, specifically during well, I don't want this video to get flagged anyway, but I'm just going to call it the pandy. That tends to be the word nowadays you can use without getting flagged in any way, but yeah. This, you know, at first I thought it was pretty cool being able to work from home, as I saved much time having to commute, and not just the time to commute, but also I saved myself a lot of mental exhaustion. But I quickly realized that I eventually had too much isolation, and I also realized that there were a lot of opportunities I missed out on. I mean, it wasn't that I was missing out on; it was everyone missing out on it. And when you have to be in isolation, when there was no option at the time, it was incredibly, I guess you could say, lonely. I mean, there's no way. Um, yeah, I wouldn't understand how else to say it. It was incredibly lonely. It was like great at first, but then it's like, it's like when I would otherwise be trying to hang out with friends and go to the movies and do other stuff actively, it's like no, you just have to be inside. Um, this was like so it's like I think I would say isolation in moderation. I mean, if you are doing it professionally, I guess to a certain extent, you could break apart your isolation sessions. Even when I have to work and go to my physical job, you work from 9 to 5, and sometimes I'm so busy you kind of forget about being isolated. I mean, granted, I'm in an open area, so I'm near people, so it's not like that lonely, but it can be a bit isolated. Like it's kind of funny how I sometimes forget where I work, because of like our job. Um, I guess it's sometimes a bit like you forget where you work because it can be a bit isolating to an extent. Um, I've always thought maybe I should just try to go to a coffee shop down the road to maybe break it up. Like I have an uncle who, well, I mean, I will say this, like I think you could be around other people and still feel isolated. Whether that's a bad or a good thing, I think that kind of depends. But like I said, I sometimes think being isolated is a bit important. Sometimes it could even be important for connecting with nature. It doesn't always have to be like maddening. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Maybe not. But I guess you can say that too much isolation could be a bad thing, and I highly believe that it can eventually become very deprecating. It's just we're meant to be. The problem is humans are social beings, and when I say that, we're meant to be with other humans. And the funny thing is, usually when I think of that, I think of bees are social insects. They have a hive together and they function in their hive environment. And but the thing is, there are insects out there that are not social. There are other insects that are just it's a free for all. It's a free for all buffet. They'll cannibalize one another. Things like that. So it's important to understand the way we are, and that sometimes if you really try to just throw yourself in isolation, it will not be good for you. Like if you do nothing but isolation, if you cut yourself off from the entire world, it will not be a good thing, and it could be pretty damaging. And I think this the 2020 pandy really proved that a lot. The other interesting thing is I want to say in this day and age, they say we're in a loneliness, or they say we're in a loneliness epidemic, and I think it makes a lot of sense because of how everyone's been thrown. And considering like the state of the economy and all of that, I think a lot of it contributes. A lot of it is like this effect that compiles on itself. It causes more and more and more, and it's just like no one, I don't think anyone truly gets used to being alone as much as someone says it, or as much as someone tries to cope with it. I think many of us over the period of long periods of isolation, you may, and I would say it probably goes without saying that everyone copes somehow with it, um, or if not, they go to extents to avoid loneliness at all costs. Um, through distractions, whether it be social media or some other thing like that or some medium. Um, but like I said, I think a little bit of isolation could definitely be a good thing. Just like you wouldn't want to be around people all the time. If you're like, I mean, if I was around people all the time, I would never get anything done because people could sometimes be incredibly distracting. So I guess you could say, if you are worried about loneliness and isolation, I guess you could say have in the back of your mind the times that you will not be lonely. I think that that's always kind of a good way to think of it. I think this loneliness epidemic kind of stemmed from the long periods of isolation. Everyone kind of just thought, well, this is the way it is, and I guess this is the way to live. And I don't think that's what people truly wanted. I think it was the situation, and people kind of get into that mood, or they kind of trend towards that, and that's kind of the really rough thing when it comes to it, because even people may say they get used to it, but then it's really hard for them to get out of it. But I've always thought about how I kind of went from the period of from about 2019 to, I think about this period a lot, probably way too much, more than I should have, in which many things have occurred. I mean, things still occur. Granted, right now it's 2023. But I think a lot about how, the things that I've made, like my applications and whatnot, the time that I spent drawing, it was great that I had that time, but it's just I also wish it wasn't so isolating. I mean, like, I guess you could say on one hand it would have been, like, I guess it was on one hand great because I was able to make all of the stuff that I did, but on the other hand, like, you probably for loneliness sake, it probably wasn't good from a point of view. And I think that yeah, it was interesting how I was able to basically work all the time, but sometimes that can be a bad thing because you get used to working all the time, and the purpose of life isn't always to be doing nothing but work. I mean, it's a combination of both. Like, it's definitely important to have meaningful work, but it's not everything there is to life, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could say the pandy really, really, like, I mean, considering the hours that I was pulling to make the applications that I did, the hours I was pulling, drawing, doing all that other stuff, I would not have done as much. I probably would have had a lot more balance if it wasn't for the world event and all of that. So it's interesting that I could analyze it looking back. Um, you know, I guess it's just very frustrating because it's like there's just such a, I feel like there was just such a big gap of time of missed opportunities. I mean, it was great that I was able to make stuff, but it's just so many missed opportunities. Not to sound depressing in any way, um, but hopefully it's over. I mean, until the next pandy, hopefully never. But yeah, I hope this kind of gives a little bit of insight into how it can be isolating and how to deal with it. If I had to say community, it's very important. In I think it's very important to have some form of community. I think in person is really important. I think the reason why I say a community, I'm not saying work. I think the difference here is that in a work environment, yeah, you may be around people who you want to be, But for the difference, I think in-person work is not always as productive as an in-person community. I think when it comes to work, it ends up causing it's much different. Like, you're not, and I don't mean to say this in a mean way. Like, you could be friendly with your coworkers, but it's like, I think there definitely are exceptions to what I'm about to say. But for the most part, there's not too much of a sense of community in the workplace. Like, I think there can be, but it's a bit different when everyone's kind of forced to work together based on making an income of some sort, compared to people getting together for the sake of getting together for either a cause or a hobby or a career of some sort. Um, Unlike work, of what I'm saying, or is what I'm saying. So yeah, I think I think there are different levels of importance to it, um, different levels of isolation, different ways to defeat it. I guess you could say it's not about defeating it; it's about everything in moderation. But yeah, thank you for listening to me. If you have a question, please ask below. If you like the video, please like it. If you like my channel, please subscribe. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, like, I guess you could say, like, yeah, so the amount of time I was pulling such weird hours making my applications. I know I talk about that way too much, but it was just like, I mean, there were times in which I was probably neglecting drawing a little bit to make them, because I was pulling such late hours and such early hours to make it, because I wanted to get it. I just wanted to make it, or like add a feature or something. So yeah, it was interesting, but probably not the best for myself. Thanks for listening. Bye.